Okay, great. I'd like to welcome everyone to IDE tooling for JavaScript. Just out of curiosity, how many JavaScript developers do we have in the audience? Okay, how many Java developers? Okay, both. Okay. So first, before we get going, a little background on me. I'm actually the co-author on 2 books, EJB3 in Action, and also the NetBeans Certification Guide. No, I'm not too heavily biased towards NetBeans. So depending upon which IDE you use. That's my contact information. I'll have it also up at the end of the presentation. So feel free to drop me a question if you have any questions afterwards about the presentation or the IDE support. My favorite thing to start out with is, are you still coding in Notepad? I've actually still run into developers that actually still do JavaScript development in Notepad. And so as a part of this, I always say, do you reevaluate your tools? Tools are constantly changing, just like languages and the JavaScript frameworks. So you should check in every so often to see, how have the tools changed? Is the tools that you are using keeping up with the current state of the art? And also, sometimes by switching between tools, you can actually learn different things. So in this presentation, actually, I use all of the IDEs I will be talking about in this presentation, so I'm familiar with all of them. And I hop between all of them depending upon which project I'm trying to, the project that I'm working on and what I'm trying to accomplish. So it's very important to reevaluate and to check in every so often and check, whether your tools are still up to date. So because this is primarily a Java conference, I'm going to focus on the 3 Java IDEs, NetBeans, IntelliJ, WebStorm, and Eclipse. Which probably means that depending upon which one you are, by the end of this presentation, 1/3 to 2/3 of the audience will probably rate me negative on the presentation, depending upon which one, since there seems to be a lot of most people have already picked their IDE that they're going to use and feel quite passionately about that, especially if you're coming from, if I was at a conference recently where there were, I think most of the JavaScript developers were either using Vim or Emacs. So that does inspire that sort of holy war between the 2 of them. But I'll be talking about each one of them. I'll probably be focusing, I actually will be focusing on WebStorm and IntelliJ a little bit less, just given the market share that one has and the fact that the other 2 are not used as frequently for JavaScript as IntelliJ or WebStorm. These are, by far, there's also other people use other editors as well, Atom, Sublime Text, Vim, Emacs, it's all over the board. So I'll be focusing on the Java IDEs and also talking a little bit about how you can interact, bridge that world between Java and JavaScript. So the key JavaScript IDE features that I look for are, the first one is powerful editing, auto-completion, validation, refactoring, checking the code and helping me along as I do development, being able to provide intelligent, auto-completion so that I can see what is there, because my background is primarily in Java development. Debugging browser and also client side. So debugging both the, that should say server side. Debugging both the browser, being able to debug what's going on in the browser from the IDE, so you can actually make hot swappable changes, so you can actually make changes in the IDE and have them take immediate effect over in the browser, which is very important, especially when you're trying to troubleshoot CSS and layout problems. And then also server side, being able to debug and find out what's going on inside of that Node.js application without using console.output. Package management, being able to honor and pull in stuff from npm and bower and also add that into the auto-completion so that it can find the stuff that's in there. Unit testing, being able in the IDE to be able to kick off individual unit tests and debug them and find out what's actually going wrong with them. Framework integration, React, Angular. The projects that I've worked on have used I've not actually used Angular, I've used either React or jQuery on projects. So having support for both of those that, is intelligent support that can help me along is important. Template and preprocessor. More recently, I've had to delve into JSX and Jade, so having an IDE that actually provides some help as I'm trying to learn those technologies, and also, checking what I'm doing, and not putting me back into Notepad where I'm trying to code everything in Notepad and then run it and see if it works. Framework support, and then finally, integrated project code analysis. So being able to tie everything together, give me information about the project, and allow me to see what's going on inside the project, and basically integrating it all together, debugging the code editing, quality metrics, etc. So tying everything together. So my philosophy in IDE is not just a glorified Notepad with wizards. I know that some people's approach to IDEs is that it's just, they're superfluous. You can get everything done in V or Emacs. I view an IDE as it should be, basically the I in IDE should be an instructor. It should help you improve your code. And I can say that over time that probably most of the improvements in my coding skills have been as a result of the IDE telling me, no, that's not a good way of doing it, right? Because the compiler will happily compile whatever I write, but the IDE can use, other tools like lint or the one for Java that will tell you, no, this is what you've done. Yes, it will compile, it will run, but it's probably not what you may have meant. It is not good for long-term, code evolution, or no, you should be using this new feature of JavaScript or Java 8 or something like that. So I view it, very, very strongly that the IDE is the instructor that helps you, improve your code and move along in your career. Now, in terms of feature support, the challenge with this one is that there is always a plugin. So I was trying to figure out for some of the different, because I primarily do the React stuff over in IntelliJ, generic JavaScript prototyping, Express stuff over in NetBeans. Can the IDE do this? Does NetBeans support TypeScript, which I don't typically code in, or would not typically use NetBeans for that? Does it support that? So there's always a plugin for it. The caveat is always, does the plugin work with the most recent version, and does the plugin work with the other plugins that you may have? So I can't tell you the number of times with Eclipse in the past where I've downloaded and installed a plugin and broken something else. So that's one of the challenges with this. I think the objective is to I prefer to have as much in the IDE that's been tested and integrated, so I'm not sitting there on the bleeding edge, running into an error that it says there's a problem with some JavaScript code, and no, it's actually the JavaScript code is valid. The IDE is confused and can't see something. So that's something that I always, am kind of concerned about. And then in terms of framework support, React, I said no, mainly because it doesn't, on the Eclipse side, doesn't support the JSX editing, from what I could tell. And there's a plugin for Angular support. In terms of JavaScript versions, of course, everyone is most interested in the latest ECMAScript 6. But the IDEs do allow you to switch between the different language support depending upon the project and the code base that you're editing, because you're not always editing the most recent code for something, or the target users may be using an older browser. So IntelliJ WebStorm definitely does have the most extensive set of language support of the IDEs that I'm covering in this talk. I should mention that NetBeans does support the React.js stuff. They have a file template for that, so that's why it's not included there. But they have a specific setting in IntelliJ that says React.jsx, which I'm not quite sure how that's different than the ECMAScript 6, given that that's a file type. Eclipse probably has the least. Most recent, until last year, until they came out with Eclipse Neon, they were really only at ECMAScript 3, which was JavaScript from 1999. In terms of mobile development, now by mobile development, I do not mean writing a native application for the phone. What I'm talking about is the HTML5 applications that you can write and deploy to the phones, and they look like native applications. So all of the IDEs do support writing and developing HTML5 applications that get the nice little start icon and look like a native application on the phone. So they all do support Cordova. IntelliJ/WebStorm support React native applications. That actually gets compiled down to native. I've not actually used that support in WebStorm yet because I'm not doing React native applications at the moment, so I can't quite evaluate how good its support is. But it is there, and they do have capabilities for that. But all of the IDEs do support this ability to generate and run native applications on the phone. With NetBeans, as we'll see, you can actually start out with an HTML5 project and then convert it over to a mobile HTML5 phone application. So you're not picking that up front where you're saying, okay, I'm only doing a Cordova application, and then you're stuck with that. Or I started out with a a mobile web application, and now I want to turn it into a phone application. With NetBeans, you have the flexibility to switch between the two of those approaches. Cost. Now, I don't think, I mean, my opinion on tooling is I have no trouble paying for licenses for tools. You would not hire a carpenter to come into your house, and he'd have saved money by using hand saws instead of circular saws. So both NetBeans and Eclipse are free. IntelliJ has basically a subscription model for both their IntelliJ and WebStorm, and I'll get into the differences between those two IDEs and which one for Java developers. They do have separate pricing for individuals and students, and every so often they do sales. I think a couple of years ago they had some major sale on like Christmas Eve or something like that. So if you're paying attention to your email, you can get it for like, some of the IDEs for like $10. But anyway, so that's basically the cost of the different IDEs, and you pay for what you get in terms of the support and features. All of the IDEs, you do have to install the JavaScript tools, so pretty much all of them you have to install Node.js. It's kind of the lowest common denominator, so you have to go in there and install that. They don't do anything magical for you on that. So if you're going to use Grunt, you're going to have to go into the command line and install Grunt in order to use it. NetBeans provides nice links and instructions for this is what you need to run in order to install those different features. So I like to say with this presentation, if you're getting up and running with JavaScript projects or trying to try out something new, that NetBeans is probably the easier route just because it provides a good set of starting instructions for that. So with that, I'm going to jump through each of the IDEs in sequence and then do basically a kind of a comparison look at some of the different features between them. Now, there are so many features between some of these IDEs that I'm not going to sit here going over, this one has this key combination, that one doesn't, because it's hard to keep track of all of those, and that's perhaps too fine-grained. So I like to think of NetBeans, just out of curiosity, do we have any NetBeans users in the room? Okay. Oh, that's okay. So NetBeans I like to think of as the dark horse. When I've given talks on NetBeans in the past, on NetBeans HTML5 support, most of the people in the audience have not actually known that you could actually use it for HTML5 support. So it does natively support HTML5 projects. It supports CSS3, HTML5, ECMAScript 6, and has extensive support for syntax highlighting, auto-completion, code coding, a full-fledged debugger. The nice thing with the debugger is that it actually integrates. They have a Chrome plugin, which I'll show in a second, which allows you to actually debug from the IDE into the web browser. It's not as powerful as the debugger in Chrome, but it does allow you to do hot swapping, so you can change code in the IDE and have it take effect in the web browser without having to redeploy your project or reload the project, the page. It also is nice in that it forces the resources over to the browser. If you've ever been in one of those situations where your changes aren't taking effect and you think, geez, did the browser cache that darn thing on me? And you're sitting there, hitting refresh, and then emptying caches, trying to figure out if your bug is just a cache issue. It does support unit testing, Grunt support, SAS and less support, and also, as I mentioned, the Cordova mobile applications. So this is basically a list of all of the different, there's more here, constantly finding more that it supports or supports incidentally. Of the frameworks that it actually advertises out of the box to support, and that there's actually editor IDE support for that. So it does support one framework that the other IDEs in this comparison don't support, which is Oracle Jet. That's an open source framework from Oracle that actually wraps up several other frameworks into like a tested package. So I think it has, it can use either Angular or React with handlebars and a bunch of things, but it's a prepackaged JavaScript library from Oracle. There's other presentations online if you're more interested in what that one does, but these are the frameworks that supports out of the box. As I mentioned, to get the debugging in the web browser, you have to install the Chrome plugin. For that, when you go to run a project, if you don't have it installed, it'll bring you to a nice little page, and you click install, and then you're off and running with debugging. Now, the one thing when you're doing debugging with NetBeans and Chrome is then you cannot use the Chrome debugger, right? So if you want to use the Chrome debugger, then it disconnects NetBeans. You can always reconnect them back and forth. I hop between the two depending upon what I'm doing. Sometimes I'll use the Chrome debugger, looking for performance problems, and then other times, where I'm just doing simple CSS stuff and fiddling around with layout stuff, I'll use the NetBeans one. One of the nice things with NetBeans is out of the box, it's got extensive support for different file types. So it does have a JSON editor. It does support creating React JSX files. Does work with Jet. It does support different unit testing. So it'll actually, you can say Selenium Mocha test, and it'll actually create a file for you that's pre-populated. You're not, creating a new file that's empty and then trying to figure out what to put in it. It does have the capability for generating, given an endpoint, our JavaScript code for, calling a specific web service. So you can say, okay, I want to generate something that calls this web service. It will generate the code for you. So it's got, very extensive and easy to use support. And it's not, these file types are available to all of the projects in NetBeans. So if you're working in a Java IDE project, you can still create a JavaScript file and get the editing capabilities of it. It doesn't lock you into one. You pick this project type, so you don't get these file types anymore, right? So it's not hardwired in that event. Now, when you go to create a new project in NetBeans, it's got a bunch of templates that it provides as a starting point for you to actually get up and running. Of course, you can pick something that has nothing and then start building your application from that. And I'll actually give a demo where I go through a couple of these and create some example apps. But it's got an HTML5 JavaScript application, a Node.js application, which is a server-side application, and it sets up the initial code and bangs it up for you. An HTML5 JS application with Node.js, which will use the Express framework and Jade as the front end for it. The ability to create JavaScript libraries. It also has the capability for working with existing project structures, so that if you have, you're pulling in an existing code base and it was created by a JavaScript developer or a tool, or as a part of some other somebody created it in another IDE. It's got the ability to pull in that project, and you can specify where all the resources and the files are located, so it's adaptable. It doesn't say, okay, you have to have this file format for me in order to work with the project. And then the last two is the Cordova and the Cordova application. The HTML5 application up at the top, you can actually switch that. And, that would be the one that you'd pick if you were doing like a HTML5 website or a single-page application, and you have the capability of turning it later into a Cordova application. You just go into the property pane for it. In addition, one of the nice things that I like with NetBeans is they provide a bunch of sample projects. So you go through the IDE. So say you're not familiar with AngularJS, and so you want to see an example AngularJS application. What does a full application look like, right? So you can click on that, and it will create a starting application for you to start. It'll create a fully functional application which you can then run and see. What does an AngularJS application look like? How does it work? It's a little hard when you're reading a book or trying to learn one of these frameworks to see the bigger picture. How does somebody actually develop an application with it? So it provides a bunch of nice starting points. So years ago, when I was looking at Knockout, trying to figure out Knockout, I went in here and created a sample project. The Knockout sample project to figure out how Knockout worked, right? So it provides a pretty good bootstrap to get you going and help you explore some of the different technologies. It does have code editing, so it does flag common mistakes where you're using equals instead of equals. So it is doing analysis on the code that you type in to make suggestions. It is configurable in the IDE, so you can open up the options and configure the different options for the code analysis. It does have auto-completion with documentation along with it that shows you, basically example code. So it pulls in, has extensive online documentation for you. The same thing is that when you're using Node.js, it'll actually download the sources for Node for you and then give you access to the sources so you can actually dive through that. Look at the comments there. It's got the debugging with Chrome, as I mentioned. So as you can see right here, I'm actually stopped on a breakpoint inside of the IDE, looking at the state of the data as it is in the Chrome web browser. So from NetBeans, I can see what's going on inside of Chrome. See variables. I can set up watches and do all the regular stuff that you'd expect. With CSS, it does have do DOM debugging, so it allows you to, within the IDE to basically find out, you can click on different elements, click on things in the web browser and find out where the code is for that. How did that get generated? Where is that coming from? Why is the padding on that? So you can look at the padding for, look at the padding, look at what the actual computed CSS, et cetera, was after it rendered the page to see what's going on. It does have CSS3 editing capabilities. So you have, if you don't have to remember all of the tags in order to do it. And this is one of the nice things with an IDE is that it provides all of this. So it will, tell you, has pop-ups allowing you to easily find CSS things. And then as you're editing in the CSS editor here, it actually, if you're using the Chrome debugging, your CSS takes effect immediately, right? So you can start with a blank site, go into the CSS file, and immediately begin editing and having the page, it will refresh without you even having to hit refresh on it. It's got support for less and also Sass, and so you can see where the generated files are placed. So it takes care of that for you if you're working on a project with either of those two technologies. It also has a customizable palette for doing the HTML5 work, so you can actually create and store elements in the palette, which you can then drag back out onto the IDE. So if you have like snippets of HTML code that you're using on different pages, you can actually store them on the palette and drag them out. And you can organize the palette however you want. Okay. Dependencies, it does support NPM, Bower, and the content delivery networks. So it has a nice editor for each project that allows you to go in there, and we'll see that you can actually search for dependencies and have it download and add them to the project for you. So you don't have to go out there and Google on web to find out what is this, what's the latest jQuery. It'll actually has a dialog that will display that for you and allow you to see that. It's got Gulp integration, so the tasks will actually show up under the menu. Allowing you to invoke stuff. NetBeans has been very nice. I mean, on the Java world with their Ant support, they actually used Ant as the, way back when, as the main build system. So they've always kind of used the native build system. They didn't necessarily try to reinvent the build system for their project types. So that's been the philosophy that they've taken over time. And then you can customize the menus and specify which Gulp tasks you want executed when you do different actions in the IDE. So when you do a debug project, which Gulp task do you want to run? Okay. In terms of Node.js integration, it's got full integration for Node.js. As I mentioned, it can find modules. It's integrated with the Express generators, we'll see, so it makes it easy for creating new sites. And then it's easy, as I mentioned, to take a project and convert it over to a Cordova application. The thing with Cordova is that you can actually even debug stuff that's running on the phone. So you can have the phone tethered to the computer and you can be debugging your JavaScript application that's running on your iPhone in the IDE. So it does both. It does, for Cordova, it does Android and iOS, allowing you to debug and deploy to both of them. So this is the demo, and then after the demo, we'll hop into looking at Eclipse. And feel free to interrupt me if anyone has any questions as we go along. So I have my NetBeans IDE here. You go in through the project wizard. It's not necessary. You don't have to install any additional plugins. There's only one version, although they have several different downloads on the NetBeans page. You can pick the download all or any one of them, and then you can activate the features later. You're not locked into a particular thing. So the features are always there. So if I click, let's do a Node.js application, click Next. Create a package.json. It'll actually pre-create several different files for us, Bower JSON, Grunt files, etc. Click Finish. As you can see, the JavaScript online auto-completion. And we ran it. So the Node.js application ran. We can set a breakpoint. It's going to start up, connect, and we're now debugging a Node.js application. So it's fairly easy now. That's, of course, it always looks easy in the demo. At the conference, when you get into more complicated projects, it does work. So let me hop back to projects over here. We'll create a new project, something a little more meaty. An HTML5 JS application with Node.js. It's going to take us through this wizard here, so we'll do two. Enable Express support, add less support in, turn that on by default. Click Next, we'll use package.json once again. And it's going to create the project. Now the thing is going to highlight over in red here, saying that we've got a problem with our project. So I can say resolve project problems. It's going to say I'm missing several node dependencies for this project. So I click on next, on resolve, and it's going to go out and run the npm code to pull them down for me. So it's going to run the npm installs to pull down what I've needed. Hopefully it runs quickly. In this case, yes, it did. Okay, and so we've got a demo project that's using Node.js with Jade, and it's got a basically a sample, bangs out some sample code. And so this is all set up for us. We didn't have to go out and figure out, okay, how do we lay out this project? What are the npm? So you decided that you want to use Node, you want to use Jade. How, what dependencies do you need? How do you pull it together? And then one more demo application. We'll do an HTML5 application. So with the HTML5 application, very often you're not starting from a blank slate. You're going to use, one of the, an Angular seed, a boilerplate, HTML5 boilerplate. And so, as I mentioned before, I like to use NetBeans as kind of like a learning tool. How do you use HTML5 boilerplate, right? So you can actually select in here, you want to use HTML5 boilerplate. Use an online one. Downloading it behind the scenes. I hope. And what it'll do is then it'll create a project that's using HTML5 boilerplate with everything set up for me. Right? Yeah, sure, I'll have it create all the files. And so as you can see, you've got your browser config. Your cross-domain.xml file is also, there's an initial cross-domain.xml file. So you've got a bunch of things all set up for you, allowing you to get up and actually running. Because most of the time you're starting from, as you can see, the project comes in this HTML5 boilerplate, comes in with Modernizer framework all set up. So it's got a bunch of things that if you're building up, you're not going to start from a blank page and then build your application from there. You're going to have a starting point. That's what it helps you do and helps you get off the ground and running, especially if you're primarily a Java developer. Okay. So with that, I'm going to move into Eclipse and Eclipse Neon. So prior to, it's been a long time since I've actually used Eclipse. Prior to Neon, which came out last year, Eclipse was basically stuck at JavaScript from 1999 for the most part. So Neon marked a major evolution in terms of Eclipse's JavaScript support finally. So they finally do support ECMAScript 6. Now there were plugins that allowed you to use ECMAScript 6, which I'll touch on briefly during the presentation. It uses Nashorn for the code execution. It has support for Node.js, NPM, Bower, Gulp, Grunt, Chromium debugging. They introduced a JSON editor, and also a separate IDE distribution for JavaScript. And it also has Apache Cordova support, so you can create Apache Cordova projects. Now it's a good step. JSDT 2.0, which is the JavaScript, the website of Eclipse, is a good step forward, but there's still some performance slowness with it, which if you watch the Eclipse presentations they're talking about, they're working on. They're going to use the Google Closure project. They're going to be enhancing it going forward. It also has limited front-end debugging and hot swapping code capabilities, just to name a few things. And to be honest with you, I had a lot of trouble actually getting projects up and running. On this laptop, I was never able to get code completion to work. I don't know why. I've seen videos where it is working. Why I can't get it to work when I downloaded it to my new laptop, I'm not exactly sure. But I can tell you I spent probably around 4 hours Googling and troubleshooting that, thinking, I got to get this working for the demo, and why doesn't this work? So anyway, so with ESX6, you've got two different options. You can go with, you can use Neon, the most recent, or you can install basically the Turn Eclipse IDE, which is available through the marketplace. It's basically a plugin, or it is a plugin for Eclipse, which gives you ECMAScript 6 support and code editing. So I'll go over both of those and show you both of those. So for now, when you install Eclipse, if you download the most recent version, you have the Java ECMAScript 6 support comes with the Java EE developers, and also they have created this new JavaScript for web developers installer. So when you go to install it now, you can pick one of those two. You get the JavaScript support with both of those. The one down here is missing all the EE stuff. So if you haven't, like some of the people I know haven't updated, Eclipse in the last 5 years, there's quite a few changes. Now, when you go in to create a project, unlike the NetBeans or IntelliJ, you have a limited set of choices for creating new projects. So you have basically this JavaScript project wizard. You can also create a static web project, or if you have the Java EE stuff, a web project via that. And then afterwards, as we'll see, so the JavaScript project is basically your starting point, and then you go in there and afterwards to add the NPM support. So although this Bower init and NPM init you think would be, or might assume that you're creating an NPM-based project, that's not actually the case. You won't actually be able to get through that wizard until you create a JavaScript project. So in order to use Bower or NPM, you first create the JavaScript project, and then you run the Bower init or the NPM init from the menu that we just saw. And so it takes you the step through. So on the NPM one, you punch in you select your project in your workspace that you want to add NPM support to, and then it takes you through the rest of the wizard for setting up the initial NPM file. So it's for me, that's a little counterintuitive for getting the NPM support in there. And then after you create it, they've got as a part of Eclipse Neon, they now have a JSON file editor, which gives you some IntelliSense with the file, provides code editing and checking capabilities, etc. So that's one of the other new features with Neon. And then once you have your file, you can then install. You have you can right-click on your package file and run npm, or on your project and say npm install or npm update, etc. The same thing with running. You can click on a JavaScript file and say run this JavaScript file as a Node.js application, and you can also debug it. So you can actually do both of them. They added Grunt support, and so as expected, once you create your Grunt file for your project, so it doesn't automatically create a Grunt file for you, so you have to go in there and add the Grunt file to it, and then it shows up with a little icon, and then you can click on it and then run your Grunt tasks. Right? So it's up to you to actually create those files. Now backing up, there is also the Turn Eclipse IDE, which is what is used by JBoss Tools, My Eclipse, LifeArray, Zen Studios, etc. You can read more about it up on this link to learn more about it. Turn is based upon Turn.js. And so Turn.js, so Turn.java is based upon Turn.js. Turn.js is a standalone code analysis engine for JavaScript. It's used by other editors in addition to this Turn Eclipse IDE. So it's what's being used by Emacs, Vim, Sublime Text, TextMate, etc. So it's providing the infrastructure and the JavaScript support for the other IDEs as well. So it's with that. So to create it, you go into the. Well, it's hard to read. You go into the IDE. You go into the Update Center. Select the Turn IDE and the plugins. And then what you do is after you download and install it, you create a JavaScript project, and then you convert your JavaScript project to a turn project. So you go in there to the menu, you right-click and say, turn into a turn project. And then after you get that, it'll actually take you through a wizard and prompt you for which framework do you want to add support for. So if you notice, I didn't talk about explicit jQuery support or handlebar support in the IDE. With turn, it then pulls in and gives you additional documentation and help with it. The other thing you have to do is after you set it up initially, it's set to ECMAScript 5, so you then have to switch it over to ECMAScript 6 for your project if you're working with ECMAScript 6. And then you get the code sense. This was the only way that I was actually able on this laptop to get the autocomplete to work, was by installing turn. I'm not exactly sure why. I also was trying to get the embedded web server to work, which I wasn't able to. I was getting errors on that. So as I mentioned, autocomplete doesn't work. It's got much limited functionalities compared to NetBeans. It's not as well integrated. It has limited source code analysis, especially compared to IntelliJ, and limited information online and documentation. So most of the stuff that you'll find on Eclipse right now for using it is for the previous version of Eclipse, not the most recent version. So it makes kind of finding things kind of hard. Now IntelliJ, IntelliJ/WebStorm, this is basically the gold standard for HTML5 web development. So with WebStorm, WebStorm is focused exclusively on JavaScript, whereas IntelliJ is kind of everything. So if you're going to use IntelliJ, you actually need the Ultimate Edition if you want to do the JavaScript development. The Community Edition will not give you those features, so it'll be kind of limited in that regards. So with the Ultimate Edition, you get support for JavaScript, TypeScript, CSS, LESS, Sass, Stylus, CoffeeScript. It's amazing the number of things that they support out of the box. And the nice thing is that with it, you can have these hybrid projects. So you can have a project where you're building using Gradle, and the web artifacts are using Node.js underneath the side of it, and you'll get all the features. You'll have the JavaScript, you'll be able to edit JSX files, you'll be able to kick off Gradle tests, you'll be able to kick off your Node tasks. So that's one of the nice things with the IntelliJ Ultimate support, is that you have, if you're working in both the Java and the web on projects that are both Java and the web world, where the Java code is going to the back end and the front end code is all the newer web stuff, it's fully integrated and gives you full code editing capabilities in that case. So it has definitely, it definitely does have the best editor, and I know, the NetBeans folks have always cited that they're always shooting for IntelliJ, trying to beat IntelliJ on the code editing capabilities, but it does have the best editor, and we'll see some of the differences. I'll show some of the differences between the editors in terms of what they're able to support. It does support client-server debugging with Chrome. The nice thing is that it does have built-in JavaScript profiling support. As I mentioned, hybrid projects, code quality analysis tools. It can also auto-generate the JavaScript 5 code using Babel, so it'll actually prompt you and say, do you want to generate that? It is an extremely powerful tool. This list doesn't do it justice with all the features that it has in it. Now you go to create a new project, it gives you a wizard. So it's got more options than you have with you can create all of these same types of projects with NetBeans, but it gives you basically a different set. So the HTML5 project that we saw with NetBeans would be equivalent to the empty project, and then the different projects down below. Now the thing I would say is that IntelliJ is extremely powerful. You somewhat need to be familiar with the frameworks before you use them here. So it has a little bit less guardrails in terms of a lot what you can do, because you can have complicated projects. Just like NetBeans, they have the plugin for Chrome. So you go to the Chrome store, you install the Chrome plugin. You can have both this plugin and also the NetBeans plugin installed at the same time and working on two different pages, right? So it's got built-in support for that. It's got this Babel integration, so I started editing a file, where I used some not HTML5 stuff, but it noticed with the code it says, File Watcher, do you want it to transpile to ECMAScript 5 using Babel? I say yes. It pops up this little thing saying, okay, where do you want me to put the generated code? And it does the transpiling for me built in. No, I didn't have to go through. Nice thing about this is that if I don't usually use this. I use Webpack with Babel to generate my code that way. But if you're trying to get up and running without having to delve into Webpack, that's a good way to start. I'll hop over to the editor at this point. Create a new project. We can start off with, say, a React application. Create a new window. There we go. It's actually going to pull down some stuff from, could not create the project called React Hello World because of an npm naming restriction. Okay, well, that was unexpected. Anyway, I'll go with this project right here. As you can see, we can take and do the same type of thing that we did in the other one. We can run the file. It'll run it over in Safari, which is the default web browser on this computer. I can also say debug, and now it's going to launch over in Chrome. You've got debugging capabilities. You can see there's an unexpected import token. With the debugger, we can actually set, let's see here, drag files over. You have the same capabilities over in NetBeans that you can drag files in this way. And as you can see, the nice thing with this was I dragged over this person.js file, and it said, well, I noticed that it also imports this other file, so it included that other file as well, right? So it said, this person.json it depends upon the other file, so it imported both of them for me. And now we could actually step through in the debugger and try troubleshooting this application. It has the same capability. So you have, you've got lots of stuff in terms of, let me pull up the project settings. So you've got lots of integrated code quality tools, JS lint, closure linter, ES lint. So they've got it provides more sophisticated feedback, as we'll see, than the NetBeans IDE and definitely the Eclipse IDE. But you pay a lot more for it. Okay, so browser comparison. So let's look at some of the differences between the two browsers. So in this case, I'm using some ESX6 code where I'm basically dynamically defining a method name, right? So I've specified the method name up here. Now, I'm not sure why. This is not a feature that I typically would use in code unless I'm really trying to obfuscate and drive my coworkers nuts. So if you want to hide methods from coworkers, this is a great when they're completely dependent upon the IDE. This is a great feature to use, right? So you want to have the secret method. Oh yeah, took me 5 minutes to do. Why couldn't you find it? So in this case, IntelliJ flags it, says, it can't resolve this method. Now the harder thing with JavaScript, unlike Java code, is that since it's untyped and is kind of freeform, it's hard for it to figure out everything. So it doesn't. It flags this as unresolved. Now you might say over in IntelliJ does, in NetBeans, it doesn't flag it as an issue, right? So you might think, oh, geez, it figured this out. No, it didn't. If you click on it, it says, I don't know where that method is. So it's kind of the caveat with the JavaScript stuff. Just because it says that it's okay or says that there's a problem doesn't actually mean that there's a problem. So in this case right here, it's saying it looks like everything is fine because there's no color coding. There's nothing over in the tray on the right that's saying that there is an issue. But it's not actually analyzing the code to find out. It can't actually see this case that there's a problem. IntelliJ flags it as a problem, but there's not actually a problem because the code is actually correct, right? So this is where you get into some of the things. So the nice thing with IntelliJ is you can right-click and say, ignore this warning, but you have to kind of be careful with things like that. In terms of the auto-lookup capabilities between the two of them, so now I'm just going to focus on IntelliJ and NetBeans. They both have similar, in terms of output. NetBeans has many more methods that it pulls up. It seems to pull up everything, including the kitchen sink. IntelliJ appears to try to trim it down a little bit more. But both of them are usable and give you the options there and include documentation. So you can see in both cases right here, they've found that the height, the render methods are here. IntelliJ puts them more up at the top. NetBeans started out with prototype. It was a little bit more unordered. The next one is sloppy code. Currently, NetBeans doesn't see any problem with this code. It doesn't say that there's a problem with the code. IntelliJ, this is where the instructor kind of comes in. Capabilities where I said it flags var saying that should be a let, or recommends that I use a let. It also notices that the console.log down here is not reachable and flags that as a potential problem. And also notices that the function isn't being used anywhere, which is sometimes is intentional, sometimes is not intentional. But it's nice when something isn't working and you realize that you're not actually calling it, or you forgot to include the file, and that's why it's not getting called. In this one right here, we have basically some ECMAScript 5 code. There's a better way of doing it with ECMAScript 6. Neither IDE suggests the better approach, right? So you can remove the function, and this is a simplified version of ECMAScript 6. But neither IDE flags that and says that this is the better approach for doing it. So this one's the draw. Neither IDE won this one. On the next one, imports, IntelliJ, and this import capability also works with the React JSX files. So if you start to include a React JS component, it will automatically add the import up above like you are used to with your Java code, which can be handy so you don't actually have to go up there. With NetBeans, you still have to go up there and add the imports. With IntelliJ, it will just add it'll do the auto importing for you and also the cleanup for you. So in this case right here, IntelliJ has noticed I'm using this. I start using this box class. It says, wait a minute, you're missing the import for it, and you can hit Alt-Enter, and it adds the import for the JavaScript class. IntelliJ doesn't actually flag it as a problem that you haven't included it, but when you go to try to use a method, it says, well, it's undefined. I know that it's in box.js, but it's undefined in this file, right? So it's definitely scanning the entire project. It just hasn't made the link it hasn't tied it back into the import logic. So I don't know whether that's intentional or one of the other frameworks supports that. With NetBeans, they have this nice UI that allows you to go in and edit your NPM files. So you can go in there and say, you can search for jQuery, and it will pull you up the list of all the NPM packages with jQuery, and you can then select which version you want of jQuery or of React or of that. So it's got a nice visual editor that allows you to search the NPM registry for dependencies. So very often, I'll use IntelliJ for code editing, then I'll go over to NetBeans when I'm trying to add packages to it, just to make my life easier. So I use both IDEs on the project at the same time. NetBeans for launching stuff, you've got more capabilities in terms of launching it on a device. So you can launch a web project on the simulator to see what your HTML5 application is going to look like on a mobile device, for instance. So it'll launch the iOS simulator on the Mac or on Android. This is a key win for IntelliJ. It's got the capability to refactor code. So I can click on this person class here and say rename, and it knows where that class is being instantiated and goes through and does the renaming for me. NetBeans more focuses on file renaming, so you rename the file, you rename the class. It doesn't have refactoring at that level where it knows that you renamed the JavaScript class and that you have to change wherever that JavaScript class is being used. So that makes life a little bit harder to refactor code. So in terms of wrapping up and considerations, are you working on existing or a new project? Are you tinkering? Are you trying to learn a new JavaScript technology? That drives which one you're going to use. Are you doing hybrid projects? Or are you doing something that is Java EE? You're packaging everything up into an IR or a WAR file. And is it using, do you have JavaScript developers using Webpack and Sass and Less and so forth? So that kind of helps drive your decision. Are you doing mobile or browser applications? So depending upon your mixture of your answers to these questions will help determine which IDE or both IDEs that you actually use in the end. Some resources, these are video links, links to the JSDT 2.0 site and Wikipedia pages with more information on what is new in Eclipse. As I mentioned, it is finally moving forward, and they're building it out. And there's newer features that are coming in it, so they're actively developing it. So it's no longer just stuck. So in the past, I didn't even look at Eclipse. Now they're moving forward again with development on it, which is a good thing. NetBeans, which is actually which is actually becoming an Apache project. Oracle has donated it to the Apache organization. You can see some of the links in HTML5. Gurchin, the NetBeans guy, has a bunch of excellent blogs. He's always linking, tweeting, sending out notices on tutorials and everything like that. So he has tons of resources on the HTML5 support and how to do things. And then in IntelliJ, there's the YouTube video channel for it, and tons of documentation and help for that. So in conclusion, IntelliJ WebStorm is the powerhouse JavaScript IDE. It definitely has great features. I know when I've talked more in front of a JavaScript audience, most people are not aware of NetBeans as much. It is the dark horse. Oracle has made a significant investment over the last 6+ years in its JavaScript support, and so it has come a long way. They've really focused a lot of effort on the JavaScript capabilities, and it is getting better. It is the editor for the IDE of choice for Oracle Jet, and being heavily promoted in that direction. So there's been a really heavy investment in that. NetBeans and IntelliJ are the two choices. I hop between both of them, depending upon the project that I'm working on. So in that, if anyone, thank you, and if anyone has any questions. No. Okay, thanks.